The neighborhood was the kind of place that seemed perfect in every way. Streets lined with tall, neat trees, houses that gleamed in the sun, and lawns trimmed so perfectly that people often stopped to admire them. Every house looked like it had come straight out of a magazine, with flowers blooming in the right colors and fences that matched the style of the homes. It was quiet most of the time, and the neighbors all tried to get along. But beneath this calm surface, there was tension that no one talked about. Some people whispered about the woman who lived in the middle of the block, a woman everyone quietly referred to as the HOA Karen. She was the kind of person who liked rules and expected everyone to follow them exactly. If a leaf fell out of place or a mailbox didn't meet the HOA standards, she would notice it immediately. She had a sharp eye for details and a sharp tongue to match. People often felt uneasy around her because she would confront anyone who broke even the smallest rule. Her house was always spotless, the garden perfect, and her car polished to shine. It was clear she took pride in her home, but she also expected the whole neighborhood to reflect the same level of perfection she demanded. New neighbors sometimes found her frightening. She would appear out of nowhere to introduce herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and almost immediately, she would give them a list of things that were wrong with their property, according to the HOA rules. She seemed nice at first, but it didn't take long for people to realize that being on her bad side was not a risk anyone wanted to take. The tension in the neighborhood started when a judge and his family moved in. They were quiet, kind people who wanted to enjoy their new home without interference. The judge was known for being calm and fair, someone who always followed the law and expected others to do the same. The family had just settled into the house, unpacking boxes and planting flowers, enjoying their first weeks in a new community. But the HOA Karen noticed them immediately. From the moment they moved in, she felt something was wrong. Their house, although new and beautiful, didn't meet her idea of perfection in every tiny detail. At first it was small things. The way the bushes were trimmed didn't match her standards. The garden had a few flowers that didn't match the color scheme she thought was right for the street. She started to write little notes and letters pointing out what they needed to fix. The neighbors who saw her doing this whispered to each other, feeling sorry for the new family. Some tried to warn them, telling them that dealing with her could be exhausting, but the family, trusting in fairness and reason, tried to respond politely. HOA Karen, however, did not accept polite responses. She wanted immediate action and visible compliance. When the bushes were trimmed as requested, she found something else to complain about. When the flowers were rearranged, she noticed the angle of the garden path was not to her liking. Every time the judge and his family tried to meet her demands, she created new ones. To her, it wasn't about the rules anymore. It was about control. She liked to feel powerful, as if she could make the whole neighborhood bend to her will. Neighbors watched from a distance, unsure of what to do. Some avoided speaking to her, fearing that even a simple smile could be misinterpreted as a sign of weakness. Others tried to stay neutral, hoping that if they didn't get involved, nothing would escalate further. But it became clear that she was not going to be satisfied until she had total control. Her eyes were always on the judge's house, observing, calculating, waiting for any small detail she could use to assert her authority. The judge, for his part, tried to ignore her at first. He believed that reason and patience could solve most problems. He would respond politely to her letters, adjust what he could in his yard, and hope that she would eventually be satisfied. But HOA Karen did not want discussion or compromise. She wanted obedience, and when she didn't get it, she became more aggressive. Her complaints escalated, her letters became longer and the tone sharper. It was no longer about the neighborhood rules. It was about sending a message that she was in charge. Her behavior started affecting the neighborhood as a whole. People began to feel the tension whenever they walked past her house. Children played quietly, knowing she might complain about noise. Neighbors mowed their lawns more often, not for themselves, but to avoid being scolded. The once peaceful streets now had an undercurrent of fear. HOA Karen's obsession with control was spreading like a shadow over the whole block. Meanwhile, the judge's family tried to maintain their calm. They focused on their work, their children, and the simple joys of life. They trimmed the bushes, rearranged the flowers, and even painted the mailbox to meet her demands, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. Every gesture of goodwill was met with a new list of complaints. It became clear that her problem was not the house itself. but the fact that someone could live there without immediately acknowledging her authority. The tension reached a point where even the smallest interactions became stressful. A casual conversation over the fence could turn into an argument about rule violations. A package left on the porch could be criticized. HOA Karen was always watching, always judging, always waiting for someone to slip up. The neighborhood was trapped in a strange cycle of fear and obedience, and the judge's family, despite their patience, began to feel the strain. Some neighbors tried to intervene, offering advice or support, but HOA Karen was unpredictable. She saw any attempt to reason with her as a challenge, and she responded with even more determination to assert her control. People started to talk about her in hushed tones, sharing stories of how she had harassed other residents before, how she had used the HOA rules as a weapon, not as guidance. It became clear that she was not just a strict rule enforcer. She was someone who thrived on power and confrontation. As the weeks went by, the judge's family realized that patience and compliance were not going to solve the problem. HOA Karen's obsession was personal now. She wanted to dominate, to humiliate, to make it clear that anyone who moved into the neighborhood must submit to her will. They began to fear what might happen next, knowing that her temper and sense of entitlement could lead to actions far beyond simple complaints. The story of the quiet, perfect suburb and the obsessive HOA Karen was just beginning. Neighbors whispered about what might come next, some in disbelief, others with a sense of dread. The calm streets and beautiful lawns were only a mask over the tension building silently, waiting for the day when HOA Karen's obsession would reach its breaking point. And as she stood on her porch watching the judge's house with narrowed eyes, it was clear that this was not a battle that would end with a simple apology or a neatly trimmed bush. Something far more dramatic was looming on the horizon, and the neighborhood could only wait and watch, unsure of what would happen when control and obsession collided in their once peaceful community. The calm of the neighborhood began to fade as days turned into weeks. The judge and his family had tried to live peacefully, keeping their house in order and following the HOA rules as best as they could. But HOA Karen's watchful eyes seemed never to rest. Every morning she walked her driveway with a clipboard, jotting down notes, inspecting fences, plants, and even the smallest details that most people would ignore. The neighbors had learned to avoid eye contact, hurried past her house, or pretended not to notice the scrutiny. The sense of normal life that had once filled the streets was slipping away, replaced by a quiet tension that everyone felt, but few spoke about. For HOA Karen, small imperfections became monumental problems. She started documenting every deviation from what she considered proper. A crooked flower, a slightly uneven path, a tree branch that hadn't been trimmed to her liking. Each note she made was a small act of war in her mind. She mailed letters to the judge, carefully listing what needed correction, insisting on immediate action. The judge responded calmly to each letter, explaining that they were trying their best and asking for reasonable understanding. But HOA Karen did not accept reason. Her expectation was perfection, not compromise. Neighbors noticed her behavior becoming more intense. She would stand on the street corner, watching the judge's family come and go, timing how long they spent in the yard or whether they followed her imagined schedule. She even began taking photos of things she considered violations. To the outside observer, it was almost like she was preparing a report, but the report was not for any official purpose. It was for her own sense of control. Every detail mattered, and nothing was ever sufficient. The judge and his family tried different approaches to ease the situation. They attempted small gestures like inviting HOA Karen over for tea to discuss matters politely. They hoped that direct conversation might calm her obsession. But HOA Karen saw these gestures as a challenge to her authority, rather than an act of kindness. Her sharp eyes scrutinized their every word, waiting for any sign of weakness or disobedience. She would smile politely, but inside she was already planning her next move, her next letter, her next complaint. To her, the entire neighborhood was a stage, and she was the one in charge of setting every scene perfectly. Tension in the neighborhood grew. People talked quietly about the situation, some offering advice, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They recounted stories of HOA Karen's past confrontations with other residents, fights over fences, paint colors, and garden ornaments. Her reputation had traveled ahead of her, and now the new family had experienced her focus firsthand. The community, once friendly and relaxed, began to feel like a place where even small mistakes could lead to conflict. As days passed, the judge and his family noticed subtle signs of escalation. Letters became more urgent and sometimes insulting in tone. Complaints were no longer just about aesthetics. They hinted at personal judgment. The language used suggested she believed the family should live exactly as she deemed appropriate, leaving no room for individuality. The judge, a man trained to uphold fairness and reason, felt the unusual pressure. He remained polite and professional, but he could sense the growing risk. Every time he looked at the letters, he felt a mixture of disbelief and unease. HOA Karen's obsession was not diminishing. It was growing stronger. The situation began to affect daily life. The judge's family found themselves constantly checking the yard for minor mistakes, measuring distances between flowers, trimming bushes in the heat of the day to make sure every leaf fell into place. They tried to maintain normal routines, but it became a struggle. A simple walk to the mailbox felt like stepping into a gauntlet. Neighbors offered silent support, but few could intervene directly. HOA Karen was unpredictable, and any misstep in her eyes could spark a new wave of complaints. One afternoon, HOA Karen confronted the judge personally. She came to his front door, letters in hand, her tone sharp and insistent. She pointed out several issues she had noticed that week, claiming they violated the HOA rules and demanded immediate correction. The judge listened quietly, responding with calm explanations, assuring her that they were doing their best and that some things would take time to fix. But HOA Karen's eyes were hard. She wasn't interested in explanations. To her, calm words were not solutions. They were excuses. She left with a final warning, her expression suggesting that if things were not done exactly as she wished, there would be consequences. The neighbors watched from a distance, feeling a mix of fear and frustration. Some tried to offer comfort to the judge's family, reminding them that HOA Karen's behavior had always been extreme. Others shook their heads, worried that this situation could spiral out of control. They remembered the stories of past conflicts she had caused, the way she had pushed other residents to the brink with her relentless demands. Her obsession seemed to intensify with every reaction from her targets, and there was no clear way to predict how far she might go. Meanwhile, the judge's family felt the growing weight of anxiety. Each day brought new inspections, new letters, and new moments of confrontation. They tried to stay grounded, focusing on the good in their lives, the joy of being in their new home. But the shadow of HOA Karen's obsession loomed over every action. Even small achievements like finishing a garden project or fixing a minor issue felt hollow because it would never satisfy her. Her attention to detail was unrelenting, and it created a constant pressure that was difficult to escape. The tension reached a point where the family started planning their routines around her expectations. They adjusted schedules, completed chores earlier, and tried to anticipate complaints before they even arrived. It was exhausting, and it was clear that this was not a normal neighborly relationship. The judge, always calm and patient, began to recognize that her obsession was not about rules but about control and dominance. He realized that reasoning with her was unlikely to work, and that this situation could escalate further if not handled carefully. As the weeks turned into months, the obsession became more intense. HOA Karen's actions shifted from passive complaints to more aggressive tactics. She would linger near the judge's house, taking photographs, timing their activities, and making notes in her ever-present clipboard. Every detail of their lives was scrutinized, and she seemed to derive satisfaction from the stress she caused. The neighborhood was caught in a strange tension, outwardly calm but filled with whispers and anxious glances. People felt trapped between wanting to help and fearing the consequences of stepping into her path. The judge and his family started to feel the psychological toll. The constant scrutiny and criticism left them on edge. Even small missteps like leaving a car slightly askew or a window open too long felt like potential disasters. They began discussing ways to protect themselves, thinking about the boundaries they needed to set and wondering how far HOA Karen might go. It was clear that her obsession was growing into something dangerous, something that could no longer be managed through patience and kindness alone. The neighborhood, too, began to sense that this situation was reaching a critical point. Some residents quietly discussed how HOA Karen had always escalated situations beyond reason in the past. Others hoped that the judge's calm demeanor would be enough to contain her. But deep down, They feared that the confrontation could grow into something much more serious. The balance of the once peaceful community was tipping, and the stage was set for an event that no one could predict. As HOA Karen continued her vigilant watch, neighbors observed her with a mix of fear, curiosity, and helplessness. They had seen her drive confrontations before, but this situation was different. The judge was a respected figure, calm and fair, and yet even he seemed powerless against her relentless attention. It was a strange, unsettling spectacle. A woman consumed by control, a family trying desperately to maintain peace, and a neighborhood caught in the middle, watching anxiously for what might happen next. Every letter, every visit, every scrutinizing glance from HOA Karen became another piece of the building tension. The judge's family realized that this was no longer about small rules or aesthetics. Her obsession had taken on a life of its own. The quiet streets and perfect lawns masked a growing storm, a situation that seemed likely to erupt at any moment. And as they moved through their daily lives, constantly adjusting, constantly anticipating, they understood that the calm of the neighborhood had vanished, replaced by a lingering sense of fear and anticipation, waiting for the day when HOA Karen's obsession might cross a line from which there was no return. As time passed, HOA Karen's fixation on the judge and his family became more intense, bordering on obsession. Every day she found new things to scrutinize, new ways to assert her dominance. She would stand on her porch early in the morning, binoculars in hand, observing the smallest movements in their yard. She noted the angle of the sun on the lawn, the way shadows fell across the flower beds, and whether the children's toys were arranged correctly. Nothing escaped her attention. It was no longer just about HOA rules. It was about control, about asserting power over someone who had, in her mind, dared to exist in her neighborhood without bowing to her authority. The judge's family tried to maintain normalcy. They trimmed the bushes, adjusted the garden paths, and even repainted the mailbox. Every attempt to appease HOA Karen was met with further scrutiny and more complaints. She began leaving long letters at their door, filled with detailed instructions on how to correct everything she considered wrong. Her language grew sharper and more personal. She wrote as though she was judging not just their house but their character. The family, despite their patience and reason, felt the growing weight of her hostility. Each day, what should have been simple chores became exercises in anxiety and fear. Neighbors were growing concerned. They noticed HOA Karen's increasing boldness and the way she seemed to stalk the judge's family. Some tried to speak to her, to reason with her, but she dismissed any advice as irrelevant. She made it clear she was the ultimate authority in the neighborhood, and no one could challenge her judgment. The community, once friendly and peaceful, now existed under a shadow of tension. People whispered about what might happen if she pushed her obsession too far, and there was a general sense of unease that something serious was brewing. One evening, the judge's family returned from dinner to find another note slipped under their door. It was longer than usual, filled with criticism about things that had already been fixed. She complained about the angle of the garden path, the placement of the garden gnomes, and even the way the wind had moved the tree branches. The letter ended with a warning, implying that continued non-compliance would result in consequences. The family felt a mix of disbelief and fear. They realized that HOA Karen's behavior had crossed the line from mere annoyance into something dangerous. The tension reached a peak one afternoon when the family noticed smoke rising from the back of their house. Panic surged through them as they ran outside to see flames beginning to engulf the exterior walls. Neighbors gathered, calling the fire department and trying to help, but it was clear that the fire was deliberate. The judge's family watched helplessly as firefighters battled the flames, praying that no one would be hurt. It was a terrifying moment, one that shattered the sense of security they had felt in their home. Investigators arrived quickly, questioning the family and the neighbors. The evidence pointed toward arson, and suspicion quickly fell on HOA Karen. Her past behavior, obsession with the judge's house, and the letters she had sent made her a prime suspect. Despite the fear she had instilled in the neighborhood, no one had expected her to take such an extreme step. The reality of the situation hit hard. Her obsession had escalated into criminal action, and the calm of the neighborhood was gone forever. HOA Karen, however, seemed almost unfazed. She maintained her composure as authorities questioned her. She gave her statements with confidence as though she had done nothing wrong. To her, the fire was a message, a final statement of her control over the judge and his family. She appeared detached, almost proud in her defiance. The neighbors watched in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the audacity of her actions. It was as if her obsession had consumed all sense of reason, leaving only a desire to dominate and punish. The judge's family was left to deal with the aftermath. Their home had suffered significant damage, and the process of rebuilding felt overwhelming. Insurance claims, repair work, and the emotional toll of the incident weighed heavily on them. They struggled to find a sense of normalcy, knowing that the woman who had caused this chaos lived just doors away. Every day brought reminders of her obsession and the fear she had instilled. The family realized that their battle was not just about rebuilding a house, but about reclaiming their sense of safety and peace. Neighbors rallied around the judge's family, offering support and assistance wherever they could. Some helped with temporary repairs, others provided meals, and many offered moral support. Despite the fear of HOA Karen's unpredictable behavior, the community came together, showing solidarity and compassion. It was a reminder that even in the face of obsession and cruelty, people could find strength in unity. Yet, the shadow of HOA Karen's actions lingered, a constant reminder that control and obsession can escalate beyond anyone's expectations. HOA Karen's presence became even more unsettling after the fire. She continued her daily routines, walking the streets with her clipboard, making notes and observing neighbors. There was an eerie calmness to her behavior, a sign that she felt no remorse for what had happened. The judge's family and the neighbors understood that her obsession had not been quelled. It had only grown more dangerous. The realization was chilling. Someone who could commit such an act and remain unapologetic posed a real threat to the entire neighborhood. The story of HOA Karen and the judge's family spread beyond the neighborhood. News outlets picked up the incident, reporting on the unusual conflict and the shocking escalation to arson. People were fascinated by the story, both horrified and intrigued by the audacity of her actions. The community found itself in the spotlight, with the judge's family navigating media attention while trying to heal and rebuild their lives. HOA Karen, meanwhile, remained a central figure of controversy, her obsession and actions capturing public attention. In the days following the fire, investigators continued to piece together evidence. Neighbors provided statements, letters were examined, and patterns of behavior were analyzed. Karen's meticulous documentation of the judge's property, her obsessive letters, and her prior confrontations painted a clear picture of premeditation. It was evident that her obsession had driven her to take drastic action, crossing the line from harassment to criminal behavior. The neighborhood, once quiet and serene, had become a case study in how unchecked obsession could escalate into something dangerous and destructive. The judge's family faced the difficult task of rebuilding not only their home but also their sense of security. Every day was a reminder of the fire, the threat, and the obsessive neighbor who had caused so much fear and damage. They focused on practical matters, repairs, insurance, and safety measures, while also seeking emotional support. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers offered encouragement, helping them navigate a situation that felt overwhelming and surreal. It was a time of resilience, of finding strength in adversity, and of confronting the reality of living next to someone consumed by obsession. Despite the trauma, the judge and his family remained composed and determined. They refused to let fear dictate their lives. They followed legal procedures, cooperated with investigators, and took steps to protect themselves and their property. They also reflected on the broader implications of the situation, how a neighbor's unchecked obsession could escalate, how appearances of calm neighborhoods can mask underlying tension, and how vigilance, patience, and community support are essential in times of crisis. Meanwhile, Karen continued to act as though nothing had happened. Her daily routines, her watchful observations, and her critical eye did not waver. It was a stark reminder to the community that obsession and entitlement, when left unchecked, could lead to dangerous and unpredictable outcomes. The incident had forever changed the neighborhood, leaving a lasting impact on both the judge's family and their neighbors. The sense of security and trust that once defined the streets was now replaced by vigilance, awareness, and a cautious respect for the boundaries that HOA Karen had crossed. As the neighborhood slowly recovered, the story of HOA Karen's obsession and the fire remained a topic of conversation, a cautionary tale for anyone living under strict HOA rules. It was a reminder that human behavior can escalate in unexpected ways, that obsession and entitlement can transform ordinary conflicts into crises, and that even the most peaceful communities are not immune to the consequences of unchecked control. The judge's family, though shaken, began to rebuild their lives, determined to regain a sense of normalcy and to protect themselves from further escalation. Yet the shadow of HOA Karen's obsession lingered, a warning of the dangers of obsession and the human capacity for extreme behavior when driven by a need for control. The courtroom was tense, filled with the quiet hum of anticipation. The trial was scheduled to begin in the morning, and the judge's family arrived early, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination. They had endured weeks of fear, sleepless nights, and the devastation of their home. The neighborhood had rallied around them, offering support, but nothing could erase the memory of what had happened. Now they faced the person who had caused it all, HOA Karen. The woman who had obsessed over their home, scrutinized their every move, and ultimately set fire to their house, was about to face justice. The judge's family found their seats near the front, close enough to see every detail of the courtroom. The air was heavy with tension, and the whispers of spectators filled the room. Everyone was eager to witness the proceedings, yet there was an unspoken understanding that this was more than just a trial. It was a confrontation between obsession and reason, between control and fairness. The family knew they had to remain calm, despite the fear that lingered from the past events. Karen entered the courtroom with her usual composure, her clipboard tucked under her arm, eyes scanning the room. She seemed entirely unfazed by the severity of the charges, or the presence of the judge whose home she had destroyed. There was a confidence in her stride, almost as if she belonged there and was entitled to be in the center of attention. The courtroom fell silent as she took her seat, the tension palpable. Everyone could feel the audacity radiating from her presence. The trial began with opening statements from the prosecution. The lawyers laid out the case with careful precision, detailing HOA Karen's obsession, the letters she sent, her surveillance of the judge's home, and the events leading up to the fire. They explained how her behavior had escalated from neighborhood complaints to criminal action, creating a dangerous environment for the judge and his family. Each statement painted a vivid picture of her obsession, showing that this was not a simple conflict but a serious case of harassment and arson. When it was HOA Karen's turn to speak, she maintained her calm demeanor. She denied wrongdoing, claiming that she was simply protecting the standards of the neighborhood. Her words were measured, her tone confident, and she spoke as though she believed she had done nothing wrong. The courtroom listened in disbelief, struggling to comprehend her lack of remorse. It was clear that in her mind she had acted out of duty and entitlement rather than malice. Her presence alone was enough to create unease among everyone in the room. Witnesses were called to testify. Neighbors recounted the countless letters, visits, and confrontations they had witnessed. They spoke of HOA Karen's obsessive behavior, her relentless attention to minor details, and the fear she had instilled in the community. Some described how she would time the judge's family, photograph their property, and make comments that went far beyond what was reasonable. The jury listened closely, and the courtroom grew tense as each account added weight to the prosecution's case. The judge's family provided testimony as well. They spoke of the anxiety, fear, and emotional strain caused by HOA Karen's behavior. They described the fire in detail, explaining how they had discovered it, the chaos that ensued, and the impact it had on their lives. They shared how their daily routines had been disrupted, how they had feared for their safety, and how they struggled to rebuild their sense of normalcy. Their words were heartfelt and sincere, showing the human toll of HOA Karen's obsession. Throughout the proceedings, HOA Karen's composure never wavered. She listened to every testimony with a calm expression, occasionally taking notes, her eyes never leaving the courtroom. Her audacity was both shocking and unsettling. Spectators whispered among themselves, astonished that someone could commit such an act and remain unapologetic in the face of clear evidence. It was as if her obsession had become her identity, and she was unwilling to admit fault or consider the consequences of her actions. As the trial continued, The prosecution presented evidence of HOA Karen's letters, photographs, and documented observations of the judge's home. Each piece of evidence reinforced the narrative of obsession and control. The jury could see a pattern emerging. Her actions were deliberate, calculated, and persistent. The case was not just about a fire. It was about the escalation of behavior, the consequences of obsession, and the impact on innocent lives. HOA Karen's defense attempted to portray her actions as minor neighborhood disputes, arguing that the letters and inspections were merely attempts to uphold HOA standards. They claimed that she had no intent to cause harm and that the fire was an unfortunate accident. However, the evidence and testimonies presented by the prosecution made it difficult to support this narrative. The jury could see the meticulous planning, the prior warnings, and the intensity of her behavior leading up to the incident. It was clear that the obsession had crossed the line into criminal action. Throughout the trial, the judge whose home had been destroyed maintained a professional demeanor. He listened carefully to each argument, each testimony, and each piece of evidence. He understood the importance of fairness and the rule of law, even when faced with someone who had violated both. His composure was a stark contrast to HOA Karen's audacious confidence, highlighting the difference between reasoned authority and obsessive control. The courtroom became a stage where these two forces, obsession and justice, played out in front of everyone. During cross-examinations, HOA Karen's arrogance was evident. She answered questions with certainty, dismissing suggestions that her actions had caused harm. Her explanations often circled back to her sense of duty, her belief in her authority over the neighborhood, and her perception that others were in the wrong. The jury and spectators watched in disbelief, struggling to reconcile her calm demeanor with the chaos she had caused. It was a chilling display of entitlement and obsession. As the trial progressed, the emotional weight on the judge's family became more apparent. Reliving the events of the fire, the letters, and the harassment brought back a flood of fear and anxiety. Yet they remained strong, determined to present their story clearly and truthfully. Their resilience was noted by the jury, who could see the human impact of HOA Karen's obsession. It was a reminder that the case was not just about rules or property, but about real people whose lives had been disrupted by someone else's relentless need for control. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier as closing arguments approached. The prosecution emphasized the pattern of behavior, the deliberate nature of HOA Karen's actions, and the human consequences. They argued that her obsession had escalated into criminal behavior, resulting in the fire and emotional trauma. The defense continued to argue for a more lenient view, portraying her as a concerned neighbor rather than a criminal. Yet the evidence and testimonies presented over the course of the trial painted a compelling picture of intentional and harmful obsession. When the trial concluded, the jury deliberated and the courtroom was filled with anticipation. Neighbors, family, and spectators waited quietly, understanding the significance of the moment. It was more than a legal proceeding. It was a confrontation between unchecked obsession and the rule of law. HOA Karen sat calmly, her expression unreadable, as if she were confident the outcome would favor her. The judge's family remained composed, holding on to hope that justice would be served, and that their lives could begin to heal from the trauma they had endured. Finally, the jury returned. The courtroom held its breath as the foreperson read the verdict. HOA Karen was found guilty on multiple charges, reflecting both the criminal nature of her actions and the deliberate obsession that had led to the fire. The family and neighbors felt a mixture of relief and vindication. It was a moment of closure, a recognition that obsession, when unchecked, can escalate into dangerous and destructive behavior, but that justice could still prevail. Even after the verdict, the story of the trial remained a topic of conversation throughout the neighborhood. People discussed the events, the audacity of HOA Karen, and the importance of boundaries, empathy, and community support. The judge's family began the slow process of rebuilding their home and their lives, supported by neighbors who had witnessed their ordeal. The experience left a lasting impact, not only on the family but on the entire community, highlighting the dangers of obsession, the importance of vigilance, and the power of justice in restoring balance. HOA Karen's presence, though legally constrained, continued to be felt in the neighborhood. The fear and tension she had caused did not disappear overnight, but the verdict provided a sense of accountability, The story became a reminder that obsession and entitlement can escalate in unexpected ways, but that communities and legal systems have the ability to confront such behavior and protect the innocent. The trial had tested the resilience of the judge's family, the patience of the neighbors, and the limits of human obsession. It was a lesson in both caution and courage, showing that even in the face of extreme behavior, reason, fairness, and support can prevail. Life slowly began to return to the neighborhood, but the memory of what had happened lingered in every corner. The judge's family had started rebuilding their home, piece by piece, focusing on repairs and restoring what had been lost. The process was long and exhausting, but they approached it with determination. They wanted their home to be a place of safety and comfort again, a sanctuary that could withstand the trauma they had endured. Every nail hammered and every wall painted felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming their lives from the shadow of HOA Karen's obsession. The community remained close-knit in the aftermath. Neighbors who had once simply waved from across the street now came together in a spirit of solidarity. They helped with repairs, shared meals, and offered emotional support to the judge's family. People spoke openly about the events, reflecting on how quickly obsession could escalate and how important it was to recognize warning signs before they led to harm. There was a sense of collective relief that justice had been served, but also an understanding that the experience had changed everyone involved. HOA Karen faced the consequences of her actions. The legal system had held her accountable, and the verdict ensured that she could no longer act with impunity. While she continued to live in the neighborhood for a time, the restrictions imposed on her behavior limited her ability to interfere in the lives of others. The presence of law and order provided a sense of security that had been missing for so long. The community realized that unchecked obsession and entitlement could have devastating effects, but also that mechanisms of justice existed to protect those who were vulnerable. For the judge's family, the journey was both practical and emotional. They focused on rebuilding the home, but they also worked to restore a sense of normalcy in their daily lives. Children who had been frightened by the events were encouraged to play outside again, and routines that had been disrupted by fear gradually resumed. The family spent time together, reinforcing the bonds that had been tested by the ordeal. They celebrated small milestones like finishing a room or planting a new garden, finding joy in the progress they were making despite the past trauma. The neighborhood as a whole learned valuable lessons. People became more aware of the impact that one person's obsession could have on a community. They discussed strategies for addressing conflicts early, setting boundaries, and recognizing signs of extreme behavior before it escalated. Meetings of the HOA took on a new importance, focusing not just on rules but on the well-being and safety of the community. The event served as a reminder that vigilance and empathy were essential in maintaining harmony and protecting one another. HOA Karen's audacity had left a lasting impression, but the community's response showed resilience. People had seen firsthand the effects of obsessive behavior and understood the importance of support systems, both legal and social. Neighbors became more attentive to one another, checking in on families, offering assistance, and fostering a culture of mutual respect. The experience had strengthened bonds, creating a network of care and awareness that would serve the community in the future. The judge and his family reflected on their experience with a mix of relief and gratitude. They had endured fear, anxiety, and loss, but they had also witnessed courage, compassion, and solidarity. The ordeal had tested their patience and resilience, but it had also revealed the strength of human connection and the power of justice. They recognized that their story was not just about a neighborhood conflict, but about the broader lessons of accountability, empathy, and the dangers of obsession. As they rebuilt their home, the family incorporated new measures to ensure safety and peace of mind. Security.